The biggest thing you gave me was time.
I've always been a proponent of do the job, do it well.
When you're a family, everyone in the family has to be treated with respect.
Coach Wooden, it always started with relationships. It always started with coaching people's hearts.
I want to know who you really are, right? You can put whatever you want on paper, but that doesn't really matter.
His teachers, they meet the learner wherever he is.
They don't care what you know.
Until they know how much you care.
Be aggressive. That's when. Here we go.
Really appreciate you, Kelly, for being on. We don't do formal introductions. We just dig right in. We get started, and we let you tell your story and tell the things that are important to you. So with that, I'd like to ask you to take us through, as I mentioned before we started, you have a very interesting walk, a very interesting process to get you where you are today. So can you walk us through your journey to now being the president at Texas State University?
Well, it's funny. Thanks, Van. I appreciate that. I had a student ask me the other day, like, how do you become a college president? And I said, well, you don't do what I did, because I never planned this at all. I never planned to go to college. I grew up in a little fishing village in northern Canada. No one I knew went to college. Now, I know that's not true. I'm sure my teachers went to college, but it wasn't something we talked about. My mom finished grade 9. My dad finished grade 12, and somehow they scratched out a living up in Canada, and they were unable to have their own children, so they adopted me and my sister as well, and they were foster parents. So I grew up in basically a foster home. I wasn't fostered, but I had a lot of foster brothers and sisters coming through, some short term, some longer term, and so we're all a product of the things that happened to us when we were young. And for me, it was watching my parents, who were, we lived in a trailer court, in a trailer, in a mobile home. They were not rich by any means. We lived in a house periodically, but it was always a rented house. And but in spite of their modest means, they found room in their heart and on their hearth to have kids come in. And what always happened was there'd be a knock on the door on a Friday evening, and there'd be a police officer there. And these were Royal Canadian Mounted police officers at the time. They're all guys, because there was only guys back then. And my mom would open the door and they say, hey, Edna, can you take this kid for a couple of days until we sort out what's happening at home? And then the kids would come play with me and my little sister. And then the cops would go in there and hang out with my mom and dad and smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. And to me, those guys were supermen. And if I wasn't going to make it in an NHL as a goalie, which was my ultimate dream, but you have that dream, but it's never really going to happen. The next dream was to be a police officer. And I didn't know how to become one, but that was my goal. And eventually I moved down south. My dad moved down to Southern Alberta February of my senior year. There's a community college not far away. And all of a sudden I have all these buddies that are high school seniors, and they're all going to college. I didn't even know what that meant. And it's February, then it's March and April, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I have a construction job, and I saw a poster for a law enforcement with a law enforcement officer on it, and said, Lethbridge Community College, get a degree, become a police officer. And I said, that's how you become a police officer. So I went to college, and it's a little community college. I was 17 years old when I went to college, and graduated when I was 19, and couldn't get a job as a police officer. So I became a prison guard for 3 years. And once you get in prison, it's hard to get out, even when you're a guard. And it's hard to become a police officer when you're a guard. And I thought my life was pretty much ended. I was basically, I told somebody once I was doing a life sentence 8 hours at a time. I was just like, my only goal was to finish the shift, get to the weekend, and then retire when I got my 20 years in. And that's what I saw my life doing. And one of my former instructors saw me one day, and we're literally crossing paths on the sidewalk. And he stopped and he said, hey, I thought you wanted to be a police officer. And I said, I do, but kind of stuck here now. And he said, hey, if you go back to college, get a 4-year degree, I'll help you become a police officer. And he said, there's a school in Texas called Sam Houston State. They got a big criminal justice program, and they'll accept kids from my college. He was my former instructor. And go down there, get a degree. And that was the beginning of I count my life before and after Sam Houston State. Because when I got that 4-year college degree, it opened up the world to me. And what it opened up for me mostly was it introduced me to my wife, and then the life of academia, because I wanted to stay in the States. I didn't have a green card, but I had a student visa. So I went back to school because I had a student visa and got my master's, my PhD. Next thing you know, I had a PhD. And you probably never heard that before, but next thing you know, I had a PhD. I wasn't planning.
Right.
I was literally stalling for time. And I thought, well, I got to get a job as a professor. And that got me into becoming a professor. And then, eventually kind of worked my way up. I was at UAB for a year, went back to Sam Houston for 2 years, went to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is where I learned everything about leadership and about administration. Worked my way up to being a dean at University of Oklahoma for 20 years, and then got a chance to become the chancellor at Arkansas State University. And that was my chance to sit in the big chair and realize that there's almost no power and lots of responsibility, but I learned a lot about myself and about the profession, about athletics, because now I got an athletics director who works for me, and then had a chance this past summer to come to Texas State. That's how I end up here. So perfectly planned pathway the whole way. So
wow, man, I've heard a lot of stories, but that one is amazing.
Yeah,
because there's all kinds of things in there, and we don't have time for the different things, but just a couple of them that I got was, number one, you talk about your parents. And, in life, if you just think about how many people who have a lot of money, who have a lot of things, who are very popular, and they don't ever get an opportunity to do what your parents did, right? Yeah. They don't get because in your life, I mean, look where you are, because they chose to give. Again, so many people, they have a lot of things, they have a lot of stuff that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But here these people they got a chance to experience giving, and you saw it. You saw it. And that's the one point, very powerful for me. And then the next very powerful point is, who would have guessed it? Who would have guessed it? Who would have guessed a young man who had no thought, no vision of college, now he's the president of a university, Yeah.
I share this story a lot because there's a lot of kids on my campus and on your campus who, first off, don't believe they belong there.
Yes.
They found themselves there somehow, and they think everybody else has got to figure it out. I didn't have it figured out at all. And I certainly didn't know what I was going to do. I was literally just trying. I was listed day to day, an athlete, and
yeah.
And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a plan, and somehow life found me. Just like the league will find you, right? If you get enough tape, the league will find you. And
right.
And that's I shared that story. And then the other story is, sometimes people will say, "Look what you've accomplished." I'll say, "Not what I accomplished at all." I can point you to 5 people that changed my life, and I could tell you about 20 of them that were standing in the fork in the road, and I was walking around aimlessly without a plan, without any plan in the world. And they said something sometimes, and there's a couple of stories, they don't remember even saying it. And that's another lesson for me. Yes. I'm always being watched. And if I say something that either inspires or tears down, that can have a huge impact on someone without even knowing, not because I'm important, but because my position is important.
Right.
And so when I think about how people have torn me down, and we've all had experiences, how people lifted me up, I want to hang around with people who lift me up. And so I've made a decision in my life to do everything I can to be always in a position of lifting people up and encouraging and edifying people, because there's so many people out there tearing everybody down, and everyone's getting beat up on. And if I can be that one person who someday back in their life later on, they go, "Remember when Dr. D said that thing?" I may not remember saying it, but we're always being influenced and influencing other people. And my life is not the story of me; it's the story of other people. And I just think that that's what's remarkable about my life, because it tells a story about what can happen when you decide that you're going to help somebody else out. The impact you can have is unbelievable. It's infinite.
Right. And it, like you're saying, it keeps on growing. And that'll take me right to my next discussion topic. Here at Kansas State, man, I get an incredible opportunity to learn from Gene Taylor, who's our AD, and Chris Kleiman as the assistant head coach. Well, before being in this role, listen, I was focused on my position, my little 3, 4, 5 guys, and whatever else happened, I could care less. But as I've been in this role and having the opportunity to see the team from the bigger picture, it's incredible, the opportunities to learn that I get every single day, because there are things that happen in your office, in the AD's office, in the head coach's office that we as assistant coaches would never have an idea of. And so I'm incredibly blessed in that way. And I get to learn from some really good leaders, but I've had opportunity throughout my career to be around exceptional leaders. And so my next question for you is, who are the leaders that you've been around, and what are some of the things that those people have taught you?
That's a great question. I think about that a lot. I'm going to tell you about one you never heard of before and one you probably have heard of, if that's okay.
For sure.
The first one is he's one of those lists of 5 people that changed my life. I was going to drop out of graduate school. I didn't understand it. I wasn't planning to become a professor. I was literally just in there trying to figure out what to do with what was next for me. And I wasn't getting it. I felt like everybody else seemed really smart. I didn't feel very smart. Didn't feel like I fit in. All these kids were so brilliant, and I was not going to make it. I was going to drop out. And the department chair and I, again, literally walking down the hallway, and she said, "How's it going?" What she meant by that was hi. But she said, "How's it going?" And I stopped and said, "Well, I'm thinking about dropping out." And she stopped and she said, "What's going on?" I said, "I'm just not getting it. And I feel like I don't fit in here. I'm a criminal justice major and I'm in the sociology department, and square peg, round hole." And she said, Have you met Ben Crouch? And I said, I don't know who that is. She said, "Come with me." And this Friday afternoon, like 3 p.m, walks me down to Dr. Crouch's office, and she knocks on the door, and the door opens and says, "Ben, this is Kelly. He used to work in prison. He's a Canadian, and you do research in prisons and with prison guards and inmates, and you guys might have a lot in common, but he's thinking about dropping out of graduate school. Would you mind talking to him?" And he says, "Oh, sure. Kelly, come on in." And he spent 2 hours with me that afternoon and took a guy who was going to drop out, who thought, the end was near. And I got to move back to Canada, because if I'm not in school, I got to go back.
Right.
And so he kind of mentors me and says, "Okay, starting Monday, you're going to start working for me. And I got literally a closet across the hall. And we'll put you in the office there, and I'll get a phone for you. I'll get you a computer. You work for me." And that he took off from there and became my mentor. And, I wasn't really close with my dad for lots of reasons, but it was just that he became like a father figure to me in a time where I was becoming of age. I was a little older, but it took me a long time to grow up. And,
right.
And he was there right when I was kind of hitting my mark. I was married. We're about to have our first child. And one day we drove to Brownwood, Texas. And right when we got to Brownwood, it just started pouring down rain. And so we just sat in his car. He was driving. I was in the passenger seat. We started talking about having kids. I was about to have my first child. And I'm saying, I'm going to have a boy, and he's going to play football and baseball and all this stuff. And he said, "If you're lucky, you'll have girls. You're a girl dad." And he starts explaining to me the difference between being a father and a dad. He said, anybody can be a father. Biologically, anyone can be a father, but it takes something special to be a dad. And he starts mentoring me through that thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking, why does he care about me? Well, I'm nobody. And like what? And so I started getting kind of emotional, like, because he was like he was literally like sitting there pouring himself into me. Like, I've got all this wisdom. You should soak some of this up. And at one point I said, "Dr. Crouch, how could I ever repay you for what you've done for me? I can't believe where I am now from where I met you." And he said, "Kelly, you don't have anything I want, so you can never repay me." But then he said, "Someday you'll be sitting behind the steering wheel, and there'll be someone else sitting in the passenger seat. And and they need something from you. And when you do that for them, that's how you pay me back. Because, someone did that for me."
Yes.
I've never forgotten. There's a movie that came out many years later called Pay It Forward. Yes. But that's what he was teaching me. And there's not a time in my career in a daily basis where someone doesn't ask me for something. And I don't think about Dr. Crouch, where he said, you got to help that person. And so it could be the smallest thing. A student group wants me to come take a picture. Somebody wants me to do a podcast. I never say no to anybody. And it's one of the most enriching parts of my career is being able to say yes and not holding back, because he didn't hold back to me.
Right.
You mentioned about giving, and then the other person, you do know this, when I became the faculty rep at OU, I went and met with Joe Castiglione, who I'd met, but didn't know. I was on the athletics council. And Joe said, hey, I want you to understand our program. If you want, you can come to all our senior staff meetings if you want, and you sit in on those. I had no idea how athletics works. Like, to me, I go to a game, I buy some popcorn, drink a Coke, watch the game, I yell and get mad, and I go home and it's over. I had no idea. We went to my first meeting. It was like July. And they're talking about the first game, like how we're going to work out the parking and the traffic flow. Norman, Oklahoma, they turn all the roads are one way before the game.
Right.
We're all one way going out after the game. Yeah. And I said, it's July. You guys are talking about the first game already? I said, we've been doing this since February. And so you're late getting here. And so what I learned about Joe was about honesty and integrity and about understanding your job. Like, he understand everything about his job. He didn't do everything, but he understood what the finance people were doing, what the fundraising people were doing, what the ticketing people were doing. And he would always say, well, I'm just an old marketing guy, but I don't know everything, but should we look at this? And his people loved him and would do anything for him. And I got to be where I would, as a FAR, I can't do everything for him, but I just loved that guy because he was so gracious with his time with me. And I saw him do that with other people, mentoring people. So many people are now athletics directors that work for him. And I got to see behind the scenes how athletics work. And when I became a president or the chancellor at Arkansas State, I knew how athletics worked because of him. He could have pushed me aside and kept me aside, but he brought me in. And I got to see behind the curtain how one of the best athletics programs in the country works. And he's on that group of people that changed my life forever because they cared about me and wanted to give me more than I could find on my own.
Wow. Again, you give me a lot to unwrap. But you go back to giving. Go back to giving. You made the note about both names that you mentioned, both mentors that you had, and the importance of them taking the responsibility. I call it the responsibility of pouring into you, pouring into someone else. So one of the first guests, here I am using another podcast word, one of the first guests on this program was a coach who's now at Valdosta State, Tremaine Jackson. He's a head coach there. Well, I coached Tremaine in high school, and Tremaine relived that moment for him when he asked me, Coach, what can I do to pay you back? You've been such an inspiration in my life, such a leader in my life. And what I said to him is, man, I want you to do what I did for you for someone else. Well, one day I'm at the convention. First, I took Tremaine as a coach. I took him to his first coaches convention. As a matter of fact, when he was in college, he would go to the convention with me. I was at another university, but he said, Coach, I just want to go to the convention and just hang around you. I'm not a coach yet, but I want to be. Yeah. So he was in my entourage. And a few years later, when he became a coach, I was at the convention. And I was outside the convention center, but I could see inside, and through the glass windows, I saw Tremaine walking down the hall with some young guys following him. So I said, he has an entourage. He has an entourage. And so I called him and I said, hey man, you paid me back. You paid me back. I see you, you're paying me back. And again, there are coaches and there are athletic directors and there are university presidents. They will never get the opportunity to experience what you get to experience by giving and by pouring into those student groups, by doing a podcast. You don't know how many people you get an opportunity to help.
Yeah.
So speaking of your responsibilities, part of your responsibility is to find people who fit on your team, people who fit on your bus. And when you are going through that process, what is it that you look for to know that this person is a fit for a role on my team?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as a new leader or a leader at a new place, that's a question I'm working on right now. Part of the reality is in athletics, it works a little differently. You know, when a coach gets hired, oftentimes he or she will, you know, the other assistant coaches are let go, and then the coach can like draw on all his or her friends from around the country and build a team that way. In my position, you typically inherit a cabinet, and there are people who've gone in on the first day, demand resignations from everybody. I've never thought that was a good way to go, because there's so much collective, you know, memory of how things work. Now, sometimes that's a danger because you're always bumping in. Well, we've always done it that way.
Right. Yeah, this is how we've always done it.
So when I'm bringing someone new in or deciding who to keep in a leadership position, I look for a couple of things. The first thing is just trust, because I try to create a relationship with my subordinates, which I feel almost more like colleagues, where they are not afraid of me. And it's not my personality, so it's not a natural thing to have people afraid of me. But I've worked for people I was afraid of, where, oh, I don't want to go tell the boss what happened because he's going to blow his mind when he hears. And then everyone's afraid to tell him that. Or sometimes they're afraid to tell him, hey, you shouldn't do that because that would be a mistake. And then a leader needs someone who will tell him when something's not working.
The truth, right.
Or when she's about to make a mistake and say, hey, let me play devil's advocate with you. Maybe have you thought about what happens if you do that? Or maybe you should go down this road. And a good leader will listen to the people that is on her team and his team. And so me, it's first off is creating a trust relationship with them. But then trust is so important. And I've had this in the past where someone wasn't truthful with me. And to me, that's the beginning of the end of that relationship, because the only reason not to tell me the truth isn't because you're afraid of me, but because you've got some other motivation, because we don't have this culture of fear that something else is going on. And if you don't tell me the truth, maybe because you did something wrong, you're afraid you'll get in trouble for it, or you know something that's going on, you're hiding it from me for some other reason. Right. There's no other reason that makes sense if you're not afraid of me. And so to me, it's people who I believe I can have trust and faith in. And I'm blessed to have that right now. The cabinet that I have now is great because while I'm learning their strengths, I also have a lot of faith in them, and they understand that my success is their success. And if they're holding back on me and I make a mistake, then the university suffers and they suffer. And that's the kind of relationship that I'm trying to build with them. But when I've hired people, I've made mistakes before. I bet you have too. You probably recruited someone, you thought you recruited one person, got another person that came in. That happens sometimes.
Right.
What I've discovered is, for me, fit is almost better than talent. If you and I are not going to connect on a personal level, if we're not going to be able to, like, if I think she's really good at this, but we're not a good fit, like we would not enjoy it having dinner together, I got to find something that's a little closer to someone who can fit my style and not be a cancer on the team. Because there's some people that are just so angry and bitter, and I feel sorry about how their life turned out. I got to find someone who can actually, bring a little bit of joy to the world and who's positive and enthusiastic. And if they don't have the skills, I can work with them on the skills. I can't work with them on the personality and the fit. And some people can't get the skills either. And sometimes you make a mistake there too. So I don't say I hire based on personality only, but it's a big part for me. And the mistakes I've made in the past for people who I couldn't connect with on a personal level. And then especially when that played out is when I couldn't trust them anymore. And so I'm looking for those kinds of things. I also think positivity. You talk about getting on the bus. There's a great book about the energy bus, and there are energy vampires. You got it right there. Yeah. There are people that will suck the energy out of a room. And there are people, there's one person I talked to her the other day. She's a scatterjoy. Like she walks in a room and everyone's happy. You want that person selling tickets for you or raising money for you. That's a person, like everyone wants to see that person. You don't want a person who's working on your team there with, oh my gosh, here comes, Bill again. And so personality and temperament plays a big role. And then finally, how they treat other people. I tend to, I believe this. I work for them. I work for the university. I work for the students and the faculty and the staff, the players. I tell them all the time, I'm here to serve you, not the other way around. And I've met people who don't think that. They feel like they're here to get served, and they treat their subordinates poorly. And then that creates distrust and problems within the leadership team. So how they treat other people, how they treat their spouse, if they're married, how they treat the waiter when you go out to a restaurant. I watch all those things. And when I find someone who has skills, is someone people want to be around, who treat other people with respect, who I believe I can trust, I'll hire that person 10 times out of 10.
Right. Yeah, I think, the point you just made is that people, they, when it comes to leadership, we say it all the time in the coaching world, they don't care what you know. They want to know that you care, right? And it's the relationship part of it is big. When we in athletics and in the football world, we talk about building cultures, and to build a positive culture, you have to have a relationship. That book we talked about, the Energy Bus, man, that book changed my life. Sure. Because what that book showed me is that we all have missions in life, and we have to discover our mission, but we also have to help other people discover theirs. And so as we help others discover theirs, right, we can help them get to their paths or get to their places while we get to our places. Like you talked about, your mentors did. And you are where you are, helping the people you're helping because someone else helped you. And when we define our missions, our purposes, then if you're doing it the right way, it has to be connected to that. So yes, I agree. Those are the staff members that you want. I can add one story to that. I was at SMU as a defensive coordinator, and I was reading an article that one of our defensive staff members had done. And in that article, they asked him something about his relationship with me. And of course, we were friends, but he said, I'm here to help Coach Malone be the best defensive coordinator that he can be. And I kind of thought that was funny, because my vision was I was here to help him be the best coach that he could be. And we were both here to help the players be the best that they could be. And when you talk to our players, they were always about helping the coaches be thought of as being the best coaches in the country. And so that triangle, I think it only happens when there's relationship, right? When you have relationship with people, you care about what happens to them, and they care about what happens to you. And when you have that on your staff, it's big time. It's not always a guarantee that you're going to win, but you have to start there, right?
So Saturdays are busy days for college presidents, just like college coaches. And so I don't watch college football till Sunday. So Sunday, I don't watch NFL, I watch college football. And there was a really scary incident with a coach collapsing on the sideline. Yeah. And I was so moved by his players, and they were like shaken by it. And that happens if someone but this wasn't just someone they know. It happens to be a position coach, and you're typically a lot closer to a position coach than your head coach or your coordinator. And they were shaken by this because that's their guy, right? And it had, I know the other coaches went over and tried to pep them up and so on. I was moved by the whole process. I was moved by how much they cared about him and about other coaches who came in and, hey, all right, get your head in the game and we got to go. And that's the thing about football, if someone gets carted off, referee starts the clock, you got to go again. But it just, I don't think people understand the relationships that get built in a locker room among, it's not just players and players, it's players and coaches, coaches and coaches, coaches and coordinators, coaches and administrators, the cleaning guy. I mean, everyone's got relationships. And that was just such a poignant moment for me. What I took away about that is I hope people saw what the young people think about the people that are charged, that are leading them. They look up to them. And for many people, it becomes like it was for me, a father figure or a mother figure, someone who's, because they recognize that coach is pouring themselves into them. So that becomes a burden, right? It's a responsibility. Now I gotta, you've done for me, and I gotta put out, and I gotta show that I was worth it. And so that's kind of how this works, and it works best.
Right. And it, for a player, and I was a player once, many years ago, and you were as well. And
you can still play, I can tell.
But as a player, you appreciate the coach, right? Like you said earlier, you appreciate the fact that this person, yes, it's his job, but my coach, he just gives me a little bit more, right? I can tell that he cares. So then you flip it back to the coach, and where you have to understand, we as coaches, we have to understand where. I do an exercise with my players every year, and we call it stories. And what we want to do is we want each person in the room to tell their story. Yes, of course, your name is Van Malone, you're from Houston. Yes, no, we want to get below the surface. We want to find out what makes you tick, because as a coach, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can, because I know all our kids, our players, they come in with records. They come in with things that they've dealt with, and they come in with baggage, and we all come in with baggage. Well, in that room, when we close the door, if we're going to be as close as we have to be successful, then we have to all understand, right? We have to understand why you don't like to turn your ringer off on your phone. You don't like to turn your ringer off because one day you turned it off and you missed a call from your best friend, and that best friend really needed you, and you were not there. So that's why you don't like to turn the ringer off, because you don't want to ever be in that situation. So when we learn your baggage, then we can be closer to you, and we don't get perturbed because your phone is always ringing, right? Because we know why you have that struggle. My next place that I want to go is really, wow, it's been rough here the last few years when we talk about COVID and all the protocols that went along with COVID. We talk about the social justice discussions and really the ways that they helped us grow. What did that moment, right, wherever you were, whatever you were doing, what did that moment do for you as a leader? How did that help you become a better leader?
That's such a great question. And I think about this a lot, because I think I said earlier, I learned a lot about administration. I learned a lot about myself when I went to Arkansas State, because I've been there for 3 years, and we were just kind of getting going. We had to deal with some stuff the first year, and we built a strategic plan, and we're getting ready to roll here. And COVID came along and just shut down everything, as everyone knows. And at the same time, you have this social justice, Black Lives Matter movement that's happening almost simultaneous. The world just seemed to just, like, every moment you woke up thinking, what's going to happen today? And what I learned about myself is that what's so important is to not try to make friends when you need friends. And that's a saying I heard a long time ago. But when you're in a crisis, you don't need to have to introduce yourself to someone and say, hey, I know this is a problem for you. I'm Kelly Damphousse. I'm the president here. They need to know me already. And this goes with student groups, with faculty and staff, because when you know someone, when they know your heart, when there's not a crisis going on, then when a crisis goes on, so much of the response is based on faith, right, and hope. And hope is that this person's going to fix this problem. And I believe that they have my best interests in heart, and this person will find a solution. I didn't know a solution to all the racial conflict that was happening nationally, or even within the hearts and minds of our students on our campus, but also our faculty and staff. I didn't know what was going to happen with COVID, but everyone on my campus knew that my number one concern was about them, because I had established that relationship earlier. And that's what I'm trying to do here at this new university, is to engage with everyone so they know who I am, going to every faculty meeting, staff meetings, staff senate, faculty senate, going, meeting with all the athletics team. We had every sports team come over to our house for dinner, just so they know who I am. And we just had right before I got on here, we had the cheerleading squad come over. Everyone, they cheer for everybody else. No one ever cheers for them. And so brought them in, and I want them all to know me. I'm not predicting something bad will happen, but if something bad does happen, that they know who I am, and that they believe that I'm honest when I say this. When people ask me, what keeps you awake at night? It's not my budget, although I pay a lot of attention to budget. It's not my enrollment. It's not about the next academic program we're trying to bring on. What keeps me awake at night is the safety of my students and the health and safety of my faculty and staff. And when you talk about the social justice explosion that we had in that period, and you talk about COVID, when people believe that you care about them, they'll follow your lead. And that's what you're doing, is building that social capital for the time you need to spend it. If you try to spend it before you have it, you're always in deficit spending. And sometimes a leader walks in and COVID happens right when you walk in. But if you spend some time getting ready for that, and by the way, it was COVID in 2020, but it'll be something else in 2023. I hope it's not worse than that. But to me, what I learned about leadership was that it worked. That developing the relationships, which is really important for me, developing those relationships worked for me because it allowed me to lead. Because, we talk a lot about leadership. We don't talk much about followership, but followership has a lot to do with faith and belief and deciding that you're going to be part of the solution as well. I was able to create a cadre of followers that took my lead and said, hey, we're going to do this. And it's not if, it's when. And we're going to make this better. We're going to fix these things. We're going to address these things. And we're going to have open conversations about them. And we'll just be honest that I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. But when I make that mistake, that it's just a mistake. It's not because I'm trying to hurt you or hurt somebody else. It's because I'm trying to figure this out along with you. And I think part of it is being vulnerable with people and just being honest. I wrote, because it's kind of a small shop at Arkansas State, I probably wrote 200 emails about COVID that I wrote myself. I had a lot of people editing after I wrote them, but I wanted people to hear. And I was in those emails, I'm being vulnerable, said, here, I'm nervous about this, or here's something I don't know. Here's what I do know. I understand why you don't want to wear a mask, but we believe that wearing masks is helpful. And here's why we do it, and try to explain everything. And so that's what I learned. I learned about the importance of leading before the crisis gets there. And it worked in both those cases on that campus. I'm trying to do the same thing here on this campus to engage with everyone, saying they knew who I am, that they're not surprised. You ever hear the story, we're here from the government, we're here to help. When the FBI comes in, they don't know anything about anything, and they kind of stroll in there. They want to hear from the local people, because local people understand them. And I want to be the local guy.
Right. I think that's a great point, is that, when you have money in the bank, we say it to our players all the time, when you have money in the bank because you have credibility, because I know who you are, then in adverse times, I can trust you. I can, right. I know. Right. And so I think that's an excellent point. So what the next thing that I want to do, and this is a little off script, but sometimes we go off script. But I want to give you a magic wand, because during those times, there was a lot of discussion about diversity. There's a lot of discussion about, the way we've always done things. And so I would ask you, in hiring across the country, in higher education in leadership positions, I'll give you a magic wand. And I will say to you, because there's discussion in my world, there's discussion about lack of diversity in hiring in the NFL, in college. And I give you a magic wand in higher education, in administration. And I say to you, use that magic wand wisely. But what things would you do to help us, to help this world of college athletics, of the NFL, do a better job of being diverse and being broad in our view in hiring?
I think about this a lot too, because I do get to hire people in leadership positions, and I think people are always watching to see the kinds of people you're hiring, certainly looking for the kinds of talent that you're bringing in, but I think they're looking for certain things as well. And I think there's a couple things that I'd probably like to talk about. If you had the magic wand, I think that there is a dearth of people who believe in themselves. And I wish that I could magically touch people on the shoulder and say that you can do this. And by the way, it's not always just you got lucky and someone, tapped into you and brought you in. That happened to me a lot. It happens to other people too. But there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. And so be thinking about professional development, and think about your young man who's a coach at Valdosta. I mean, he said, I want to go to those conferences. There's a lot of people sitting back waiting for someone to tap them on the shoulder. He didn't do that. He went out there. When you go to a conference, you don't sit in your room and watch Netflix like I want to do. When I was younger and a young professor and I was trying to work my way up, I had to go, and people don't like to use the word networking, but I had to go meet people. And when I gave my presentation, I wanted to have people in my room. And so when other people were presenting, I went to their room, and you feed off of that. And so when young people who are wanting to get ahead, I think there's a valuable role that they can play in their own destiny by getting professional development, by asking for advice. I think it's really useful. I tell students all the time, if you want to know what it's like to be a professor, go talk to one. But before you do, go Google their name and find out the research they do, and then go in there and ask them, like, about your research. To them, their articles and their books are like their babies. They'll talk all day about it. And that's how you learn about this. And then that person says, man, Van came in here and was interested in my article. Next time I go to a conference, I'm going to take him with me because he's shown some interest. So I think that's one thing, is to put courage into people, say that, to have them believe in themselves, and then to take an active role in it by reaching out to people. Think about, I've got a young man who I'm trying to mentor right now, who is played football at a school I used to go work at. And he's a coach right now, but he wants to move up. And I'm always, whenever I see someone who's hiring, I always put in a good word for him. And it hasn't worked yet. I haven't gotten him the job yet, but he reached out to me and said, hey, Kelly, remember me? Remember when I was a student? And here I am now, and I'm ready to take the next step. And if he hadn't reached out to me, I wouldn't have thought about doing it. Second is that we are all, those of us who have risen to a certain level, have the opportunity to set an example for other people to look at, and to give people chances to come in. And I'm not saying you hire people just to make a statement or a symbolic statement, but I think that if you can hire someone that looks or sounds or believes different from what is seen as typical, then if you can diversify your leadership team in a way that shows other people that you believe in that, then the people who aren't even on your cabinet, they start to get inspired by the fact that I'm not on his cabinet, but I know he's at least thinking about me when he hired that person. Right. And so, and when I hire people, other people who are hiring people also start, the people who work for me, when they're hiring people, say, well, I need to make sure I'm thinking about diversity of thought, diversity of belief, diversity of color, diversity of ethnicity. And the boss is doing that, I got to do that too. So I have a great responsibility to be thinking about that as well. because going back to something I said earlier, people are always watching me for good or ill. And so everything I do is being watched. And if I believe this is important, and I do, and if I don't practice what I believe, if I don't do that, then I've done a disservice to the thing that I believe in. I haven't encouraged other people who are watching, other people who are aspiring to get up, or other people who work for me that are also doing the hiring. So I think two things. One is the people who want to get ahead, if they want to move up in leadership, they want to become a coach, they want to get into become an athletics director, take control of your destiny, seize the day yourself. Right. Use your networks to move up. And then those of us who have gone to at some level, accept those requests for help, engage with those people, and then lead by example when you do your own hiring.
Wow. Big time answer there. So, as a coach, I get an opportunity, and I use this example. So I see player X, and this player, he just cannot get it. He can't get cover two. We've drilled it. We've worked it. And then all of a sudden he gets it, right? I know what happens out there on the field on Saturdays, but game day is more than just that. Game day is when that player who he can't seem to get it right in terms of his academics. He is late for things. He can't get it right, but then all of a sudden he gets it. All of a sudden, when you hear him talking, he just sounds differently than he did as a freshman or as he did as a sophomore. I hear him encouraging others to be on time. I hear him trying to teach somebody else the cover two techniques that we use. That's game day for me. Yes, again, I know what happens on Saturday, but that's game day. That is when you're developing people, when you're helping them to maximize their walk, that's game day. So I would ask you, as a president of a university, what is game day for you?
Game day is graduation day for me. We're in the business of changing people's lives. And the lives we change aren't just students, they're faculty and staff that come here. Many of them come and go because this is a step to somewhere else. Many of them come here and spend their whole career here. And I hope that we're changing their life for the better as well. But when I look at our freshman class every year, and there was a time when a president would meet with the freshman class and say, look to your left, look to your right. In 1 year, one of you will be gone. And in 2 years or 3 years, only one of you be left. And if you're lucky, that one that's left will graduate. Well, that whole philosophy is changing now. College presidents around the country, universities around the country are so concerned about student success, about freshman retention, about graduation rates. And for me, when you take a student who, again, I see myself in a lot of these kids, first generation kid, poor kid, didn't go to a good school, wasn't prepared academically. One of the blessings of my life is I had a 2.54 GPA in community college. I was not graduate school material. I never would have got to graduate school. When I went to Sam Houston State, they just took all my grades and brought them in as pass-fail. And there was a fail on there, by the way. All they did was bring all my credits in, and I got a fresh start. Now I'm 22 years old. A lot of 17, 18-year-old boys like me, I wasn't ready to go to college. But when I was 22 and I went back, I was ready. I knew responsibility. I was paying for it, studying and so on. And I got to start my GPA all over again. But when we bring kids in here that they are petrified, they don't believe they belong here, they're fragile, that the smallest thing can just have them go home, pack their stuff up and go home at night, never come back. They're afraid to take risks because they're fragile. We can start getting them to take risks, to do something challenging, because you're not going to take a hard class and okay, you got a D in that class, but you're still going to be here, and try to do something outside normal. Hey, why don't you try to study abroad? Oh, I don't have a passport. Let me help you get a passport. that thing will change your life. Getting a passport. I had an alumnus who came by recently, and I went to her talk on Saturday morning, and she showed a picture of herself. She's 19 years old, and she looks like a little tiny little girl. And it's her first time on an airplane. She took a selfie, and she kept that picture because I'm in the process of watching my life change as I'm on this plane, because I'll never be the same as when I come back from Washington, D.C. on this trip, take them to school. So game day for me is just like you take kids that don't have it, don't get it. They're confused. They mess up. They do dumb things. They don't go to class. They fail a class. But by the time they're juniors and seniors, they start doing stuff. And that, next thing you know, you go to the tutoring session, and that guy you thought was never going to make it is a tutor in the action center. And you go, hey, that kid's doing it. By the way, I think the best way to learn something is to teach it. And when these kids finally get it and they start teaching other people, and it's not just teaching about the topic, it's about teaching about life and about how you survive in college. I tell freshmen all the time, I can help you, but you should go talk to a junior or senior, because they just did this. And, so I hope you can find someone like I found people in my life that'll do that. And so, but then when they walk across the stage at graduation, and we have a lot of first generation kids, a lot of poor kids, when they walk across stage, it's not just them. I saw people, the last graduation, people crying, walk across the stage. But I hear their parents up there screaming and yelling like crazy because of what their kid just did, their grandkids just did. When my mom and dad, when I graduated from community college, my mom bought a dress. My dad bought his first suit. They wore corsages to the graduation. My sisters dressed up like it was a prom. I was wearing a suit. We didn't have caps and gowns in Canada. I get goosebumps. I get emotional thinking about it. But I see that every graduation, I never not think about my community college graduation, how important it was for my family. And by the way, we're not just changing that kid's life. Oftentimes it's the siblings that come behind. They're their older brother or sister, and they're watching. How's Johnny doing? How's Van doing? Hey, he made it. Maybe I can make it. And then their kids, then their grandkids. It's generational, intergenerational, intragenerational. So we're in the business of changing lives, and I see that happen at graduation. For us, graduation is Saturday. I wish I could paint up, get the band yelling and the cheerleaders up there and celebrate like it's the biggest victory, like we just beat App State. Right. So I had to get in there because we just beat App State. But I wish everyone could feel at graduation like I feel at graduation, because the day after graduation, I'm pumped up for the next semester to start.
Yeah. So I'm listening here, and I'm hearing my life, and I'm hearing many of the young men that I've had the opportunity to coach. But I'm also hearing my wife's story. And my wife graduated from Southwest Texas.
Good for her. I need to meet her.
Yeah. So, but here's her story. She went to college, and so her counselors helped her figure it out that first year, and she had no clue. From a family didn't have any money to be able to pay for school. So somehow she got some financial aid or whatever she did. And her second semester there, or maybe her second year there, I may get the dates jacked up, but she got contacted and said, okay, you're out of gas here. you need to pay this bill next week, or we're going to have some problems. And she went to the financial aid office and she said, listen, I want to go to college. I want to finish college. I have no money. I have no clue. I don't know how I'm going to make it work, but I want to go to college and I want to stay here. I don't want to go home. And they helped her. It worked out. I was down the road at the University of Texas on scholarship and had no worries at all, but I knew her story. And I've been so proud and so connected to Southwest Texas / Texas State University because of what somebody in that financial aid office, because of what somebody did to keep this kid in school. who wanted to go to school, and she graduated and got her master's in counseling and is gone on with her life. But at that moment, just like you talked about, at that moment, it could have been all over. And somebody grabbed her and did whatever they did to extend her financial aid, to do whatever. But her family, they had no clue. They just knew that she was away at school, and how she's getting it paid for, who knows? Because we surely don't have the money to give her, send her, raise for her. And so I'm always really appreciative to that university for giving a young lady, and I'm sure a whole lot more young people, an opportunity to change their life.
And good for her though, because a lot of kids would have said, "I'm done," and just go off. And she didn't ask for help.
Yeah, I think she was quite intent on not doing that. So my final question, and this is always a cool question for people to kind of have to deal with. I'd hate to be in your position right now to have to answer this one. But with where you are in your life, with the things you've learned, with the lessons you've failed, and some you've come out with flying colors. If you could talk to your younger self, what would you tell young Kelly that you know now? And how could you help him by teaching him some things? What would you tell your younger self that you know now?
15, 16-year-old Kelly didn't think he was worth it. I had a teacher that called me out in class one day and like 10th, 11th grade, and really, had a strong conversation with me. It's the first time in my life that someone who wasn't my mom told me I could be somebody. Because I always heard the opposite. I was a chubby kid with a girl's name that rhymed with belly and jelly. That's not a fun way to grow up. And I was always the youngest kid in class because I skipped kindergarten. So I was like a year behind everybody all the time. And I didn't believe in myself at all. And so I didn't make any plans. I was just kind of like drifting along. And the good fortune that I had is that people saw something in me I didn't see in myself. And I would have accepted the help sooner if I had believed that I was worth it. And we talk a lot about self-esteem, self-derogation. I had a high self-derogation. I talked to myself about how bad and how dumb I was all the time. And I wish I could have been more positive towards myself. I wish I would have believed in myself more, because I would have saved myself a lot of pain. I would have got there a lot faster. And I might have become the Mountie I wanted to become, which is, it's still kind of, every once in a while, someone would read my bio and said, he always wanted to be a goalie in the NHL and a Mountie, and he never did either one of those. And I was like, great, thanks for failure all time. But it wasn't, and I still struggle with this, and I still struggle with not believing in myself. That's why I work so hard. I'm a people pleaser, and I'm always running scared, but I had the fortune of other people believing in me. And if I had believed in myself more, it might have gotten better faster. So that's it.
Well,
no one's ever asked me that question before, but that's it.
Well, one of the things I'll tell you is that after being around some really good leaders, even just on this podcast, that is the case with many of them, is that they never thought that they were good enough. They never thought that they could please whoever they were pleasing. They never thought that they could gain the respect of these people. And they, like you said, that's why they drive so hard. That's why they go so hard, because they are trying to climb that mountain. And then that's fine. But the thing that I've learned is that as we do that, because we drive hard, because we want to, I don't know what that thing is that we want to get to, but we have to enjoy the process. We have to enjoy, because it's a great road to that success, right? But we have to enjoy, because there's some things that you get to accomplish. There's some things that you accomplish along the way that you have to enjoy as you continue to strive to accomplish more. And that takes me to a story. I had the opportunity to be drafted into the NFL, and I was a big time second round draft pick. And one day I was in the mall in Detroit. I was with the Lions. I was in the mall, and I said to myself, so first of all, growing up, we didn't go to the mall because we didn't have the money to buy anything in the mall. So there was no mall in my life growing up. I was not intrigued by going to the mall. But here I am in this mall. And I said to myself, you know what? I've made it. I can buy anything I want in this mall. Yeah. Anything I want, I can get it in this mall today. And I felt so good about myself. This kid who some days didn't have food to eat, who some days who was evicted from his home, who had to listen to the bus, the transit center, buses coming in out of the transit center, knew that at a certain time in the morning, the first bus arrived. And that was my alarm clock, because our electricity was turned off. So you could hear the bus come in, and that would let me know that it was 6 a.m., time to get ready to go to school. So this kid who had a rough life, here I am in this mall, and I can get anything. Now, this same kid who believed that he was less than because his clothes were not as new as some of his friends, and because he had to walk home after the football game when other guys would hop in their cars and go home. This kid who just never thought he was good enough in the mall on that day, I can buy anything I want. And so that was for about 35 seconds. That was my thought. And I was so proud about that moment, being able to be in that situation. But then I realized after 1 minute of having that thought, what does that make me, right? Yeah. And I felt really bad after being in a very high moment. I felt bad because I realized that all my life, I was second class because I didn't have, but I'm the same person, right? The fact that I can buy this stuff in the mall, I'm the same person. I'm the same person that I've always been. Now I have a little bit more money, makes me no different. So I said to myself, you can buy everything in this mall, and what does that mean? And so I decided on that day that I would have to, in my life, because I wasted a long time in my life striving for something that I realized 30 seconds ago didn't mean anything. So I want to make sure that I live my life in such a way that the things that I chase, they mean something. Yeah. So when I get to that place where I see Tremaine Jackson as a head coach, and I know the impact that I had on his life, but I can name many more guys that I had an impact on their lives. That's what I chase. Right? Not being the highest paid coach, or not doing it, or not winning championships. I chase the impact that I have an opportunity to make. Well, yes, I want to win championships. Wait a minute. Yes, I want to win championships, but that's a part of maximizing people. That's a part of maximizing players and coaches. You're going to win championships. When you do that, and you do it the right way, and you serve them, and they understand that triangle, you'll win championships, because that's the way you build it, is through relationships. It's through, a lot of fundamental techniques and all those things. But if you don't have the substance behind it, you won't win. You won't win big, and you won't chase the things we're talking about. You won't chase the right things so that you can be fulfilled at the end of the day.